Can you say something, nurse?
What did you say?
What?
What?
Uh-oh. Oh, God. What the shit is... Oh, my God. What's going on?
Hello, and welcome to the first episode of Season 3 of B-Movie Enema, the series. I'm Nurse Disembody, and...
No, it's you, right?
That's Jeff Arbuckle. He's busy working on our B-Movie poop shoot that is, feeling a little under the weather right now, so...
Oh, God dang it.
How's it going under there, Jeff? Find any reason for the poop shoot to be acting up?
Well, it looks like it has something jammed in here. I mean, poop shoot, were you messing around again in the red light district, or were you... Oh boy, here it comes. Fire in the hole.
I'm ready for it! Yikes. Are you okay? That looks messy.
Yeah, that was pretty explosive. I mean, it's not the worst ass disaster I've ever seen, nurse, but sheesh, this is kind of gross.
Did poop shoot give us a movie when you removed the blockage?
I think so. I mean, let me see here.
Is that one we can show?
Well, how do you feel about women in prison flicks?
Only if it has Pam Grier in it.
Well, then I got you. Put your peepers on this one.
Aw yeah, it's Jack Hill's The Big Dollhouse. This 1971 classic is one of Pam Grier's first movies and one of several women in prison flicks to star Pam Grier in her first few years of acting. It was directed by Jack Hill, who would be best known for making several films that would be considered early feminist movies in the exploitation genre. And it's definitely going to be a trip down memory lane for me.
Yeah, that's right. Wait, what did you say?
Nothing, don't worry about it.
Okay. Well, what was I gonna say? Oh, yeah. We'll talk a little bit more about Jack Hill later because he's done some fairly significant films in this era of 42nd Street and drive-in theater type stuff. But who we really need to talk about first, and for the first time on this show actually, is the legend himself, Roger Corman. Now, I touched on Corman briefly when I talked about Psych Out last season because the man was known for bringing a lot of big-time people into the spotlight, including one of modern cinema's finest actors of all time, Jack Nicholson. He also worked closely and mentored several directors as well, like Oscar-winning directors Ron Howard, Jonathan Demme, and James Cameron. Corman cranked out creature features and Edgar Allan Poe adaptations throughout the 50s and 60s, but by the early 70s, Corman was less interested in writing and directing films and much more interested in producing and distribution. You see, the real money in showbiz is when you can distribute movies. Corman created New World Pictures in 1970. New World was part distributor, part studio. He had piles of scripts and a stable of writers and directors that he could call upon. He was also exceptionally efficient with money and passed his knowledge of that frugality to his directors. What they were able to do was really pretty phenomenal with the thinnest of budgets. Little time, but lots of very capable crew people and actors. The Big Dollhouse would be one of the earliest films in the New World catalog. He had purchased the original screenplay for this movie from writer James Gordon White. White had been an established as a writer and having several screenplays credited to him throughout the late 60s. And Corman asked for it to be rewritten, and one of the people in his stable at New World was Stephanie Rothman. Rothman was deemed one of the feminist voices in action and exploitation of that era, and it's kind of unfortunate that she never really got the respect that she would earn later when she was making her movies, ultimately leading her to leave the business feeling pretty unfulfilled and disappointed in her career. But she's got a lot of recognition now for what she did, and how she inspired other women writers and directors. Anyway, Rothman was originally asked by Corman to direct this feature, but she turned it down. So he sought out Jack Hill, and Rothman and a few others pitched Hill the story and several possible versions based on that original script by White. And Hill didn't like a single one of them. So Rothman and crew completely rewrote the film and brought in then Don Spencer to write the final script. Now, Spencer wrote 3 screenplays. This one and The Student Nurses in 1970, which was directed by Stephanie Rothman and produced by Corman. And the third was Sweet Sugar, directed by Michelle Levesque, who made Werewolves on Wheels from the first season of this show and starred Phyllis Davis, who ultimately would appear in several movies I've written about at the B-Movie Enema website. Now, for Corman, the man has had an incredible career. He was pretty much the B-movie king from the 50s all the way up to the turn of the century. He's mostly retired now, but he was still producing stuff into the early 21st century. Yes, he had that B-movie reputation. Yes, he would make some real sleazy movies from time to time. Yes, he would make rip-offs and cheap copies of more popular stuff. However, his movies have always been incredibly watchable and kind of unique while still being mostly very well made. What Corman excelled at was knowing exactly what audiences wanted, and he'd deliver it in a timely manner and would know exactly when to stop making a specific style or type of movie before the interest left the mainstream. He produced several of these women in prison movies during the era when they were most popular, and it's well known that by 1974 he was no longer interested in making this type of movie anymore. He was done. He felt the audiences were over it. They had a good 4 or 5 year window, and it's closed now. However, Jonathan Demme approached Corman about making Caged Heat. Corman didn't want to make it. He didn't want to give Demme the budget. He felt there was nothing more interesting to do in the genre, and Demme convinced him otherwise. And it's funny that Caged Heat is basically a slightly better version of this movie that we're about to watch. And what's nuts is that The Big Dollhouse itself is a very good movie. So, with that, picture how good Caged Heat probably has to be. Alright, well, shit, nurse. I guess I need to get back up into the poop chute and figure out what caused that clog. There's all sorts of worrisome things I saw down there that I hadn't seen before.
Is there something I can help you with in there?
If I'm being honest, I'm not sure what I can do about him. I can't seem to figure out what's actually ailing him, so nah, I don't think there's much.
Great, I'm just going to eat some popcorn and watch this movie.
Wow. Alright, how'd you like the start of that movie, nurse?
It's great. You have tough chicks and a whole power structure among the different cells. Very exciting.
And naturally, you have a guard or warden who is an immediate problem to our protagonist. In this film, it's Lucien, the head wardress.
Ugh, I hate Lucien.
And as you should.
And I really need to say something about the lack of gloves used when Collier was getting her vag search. It's incredibly unsanitary and completely disgusting. Nurse Disembodied disapproves.
I mean, it is a shitbag prison. Would you expect it to be sanitary? Now let's talk about a few other people connected to this movie. First up, earlier, we talked about how this was made and released by Roger Corman's New World Pictures. However, an executive producer on this film was Filipino filmmaker Eddie Romero. And Romero was a bit of a king of film in the Philippines at the time. In fact, he and Cirio Santiago, who I talked about back in the first season during the TNT Jackson movie, were more or less the Roger Cormans of the Philippines. Now, Romero had already gotten a little bit of notoriety for a trio of movies with blood in the title: Brides of Blood, The Mad Doctor of Blood Island, and Beast of Blood. His next film, 1971's Beast of the Yellow Night, released just about 3 weeks before The Big Dollhouse, was Corman's New World Pictures' first release. Romero often worked with American actor-producer John Ashley, and all that is how we get to The Big Dollhouse being made in the Philippines. Later, Romero and Ashley would make Beyond Atlantis, That also starred Sid Haig, seen in this movie, and someone that we'll definitely be talking about later. And if you want to know more about Beyond Atlantis, hop on over to the B-Movie Enema website and read my review of that from last month. But we have babes in this movie to talk about now.
Yes, get on with the babes.
We got babes.
Babes.
Yeah, so this movie opens with new girl Collier, played by Judy Brown, coming to the prison and being processed. Brown looks a lot like a young Julianne Moore. Brown had made a few TV appearances prior to this movie, but would roll this into a fairly decent little career through the rest of the 70s. She'd appear in another women in prison film with Pam Grier, Women in Cages, and then appear in several exploitation action films. And later in her career, she did get a small role in the melodrama Independence Day, in which she probably played that laser beam that destroyed the White House.
Wrong Independence Day movie.
What? No, I'm sure I got the right one. Anyway, moving on. What's Collier in here for, nurse?
She killed her husband.
She sure did.
She caught him messing around with one of the young manservants in their mansion, and she wanted in on the action, and he got mad at her.
Yep, so she killed him.
She sure did.
Yeah, that's one thing I want to get at here in this movie. There's a little bit of, dare I say, progressive attitude in this movie. There are obvious allusions to homosexuality, not only in what leads Collier to be imprisoned, but that's also, in the power structure of the girls in this cell. Grier, played by Pam Grier, dominates women and keeps them as her quote-unquote dolls. She even shows anger toward men for how they've always expected something from her without giving anything in return. She has legitimate reasons for why she is who she is and how she interacts with the cellmates and with Sid Haig's character, Harry.
She's still not exactly a good person. She treats her dolls poorly and in unhealthy ways.
Yeah, that is true, but it's a little bit more complex than your typical trope of the time of an angry black woman who hates men, so is now a lesbian.
Grier also wants to immediately dominate Collier and add her to her dolls. She already controls the drug-addled Herod.
Yeah, so Herod is a liability to everyone in the cell, but Grier tries to take care of her by scoring her heroin. And she's in pretty bad shape all the way through. She even seemingly tries to light Collier on fire, but what's she in prison for, nurse?
Infanticide.
Yep, she killed her baby, probably while high on smack. And Herod is played by Brooke Mills. She would have a few more credits to her name, mostly on TV, but she did appear in the second Walking Tall movie as Ruby Ann, and she even got a part in Disney's Freaky Friday in 1977. Also in the cell is Bodine, a political prisoner played by Pat Woodell. Now, Woodell is best known for her role as Bobby Joe Bradley in 74 episodes of Petticoat Junction.
She's a tough girl and a badass.
Indeed. As I mentioned, Bodine's a political prisoner here because her lover is the leader of a revolutionary outfit trying to overthrow the dictatorial government.
No one messes around with Bodine.
Nope, not even Grier will mess with Bodine. She's also shown to have a fairly pure heart as she stands up for Collier on her first night when the other girls are messing with her and accusing her of being a spy put in by the evil Lucian.
Ooh, I hate Lucian.
Yeah, and another cellmate is Farina, played by Gina Stewart. Stewart was in a handful of movies between 1967 and 1971, and most of them from Southeast Asia, but not much is known about her.
But she has a very important pet.
Indeed, she has a pet cat, and that cat will play an important part in the girls' escape plans and an unfortunate role as well. And that leaves us with Alcott, played by the lovely Roberta Collins. Now, Collins had quite a few credits in the 70s, and definitely in movies that we like to see around these parts. She was in Demi's Caged Heat. She'd next appear in Women in Cages, again with Pam Grier, and the action-packed thriller Wonder Women opposite Ross Hagen and Nancy Kwan. Now, what's interesting is that while after the film's release and the eventual superstardom of Pam Grier, Grier would take top billing today, and the fact that we follow Collier through most of this first act, it's really Collins Alcott who becomes the main star of this movie. And she'll be the one who will organize with Bodine to get out of this prison. She'll be the one whose anger at the system will be most followed and understood. And she'll be the one most wanting to strike back against Lucian.
Ooh, I hate Lucian.
And Alcott will do something in the next segment that is very rarely seen in film.
Yeah, let's get back to the movie.
Yeah, I guess I've taken long enough of a break from fixing the poop chute. Maybe I should get back to work.
Yes, get back to work, get down there in the hole and fix the poop chute, or I don't know, I'll shiv ya.
Eep, right away, ma'am.
You know something, Jeff?
Yeah, what's that, nurse?
Hairstyles and wigs in the 70s were pretty horrendous. Some of these girls look like they had rat's nest on their heads.
I mean, we already established that this is a pretty shitty prison with the unsanitary vaginal inspections and whatnot.
Still, getting a bottle of Pantene would be pretty advisable.
Gosh, I guess so. And I guess we should also talk about Sid Haig. Sid is playing Harry in this movie, and Harry and his buddy Fred have access to the prison to sell fruits, vegetables, snacks, and smokes. Now, Haig had some pretty good contacts in the movie making industry. His acting start began in 1960 in a short film in college. The guy who made that short film, Jack Hill, the director of this film. He'd go on to make several films with Jack Hill, including the very good Spider Baby that co-starred Lon Chaney Jr. He also appeared in several movies starring Pam Grier. In fact, he'd show up in Jackie Brown in the 90s with Grier, and that was directed by Quentin Tarantino. Of course, Haig is probably best known to people lately for his role in the Rob Zombie's film, in particular as Captain Spaulding, the deranged clown in House of a Thousand Corpses and The Devil's Rejects. Haig is an immediately recognizable character actor, and he has a down-to-earth kind of attitude on screen. And what's more is that he probably was able to use that and his easygoing screen presence with just a hint of a dangerous side to get a lot of roles and get to know a lot of directors. He was in George Lucas's first film, THX 1138, and that's pretty awesome. In fact, he had a heck of a 1971, having starred in this, appeared in Lucas's first film, and then appeared in Sean Connery's last entry in the official James Bond series, Diamonds Are Forever. That's a pretty badass year. In this film, Haig has a couple of really significant moments in these first two acts. He states to Fred, played by Jerry Franks, that even though some of the inmates are certainly pretty and fun to flirt with, they stand a very good chance of being raped by the inmates. And that's not an insignificant thing to say, and it shouldn't be taken lightly as a joke. The thought of a woman potentially raping a man is deemed almost an impossibility. Some of it is how men are characterized or groomed in society to be the one who takes or the one who reacts to his arousal. The simple truth is that son of a bitch down there sometimes gets a certain way whether we want it to or not. And there are a few ways to try to mitigate it, but yeah.
Gross.
Don't worry, nurse. We're coming back around to this topic in just a moment. Then, while trying to score some smack for Herod, Grier tries to use her body to manipulate Harry. Earlier, we did see that Harry has a special thing for Grier. She's sometimes okay with that. In an earlier interaction, Grier also got quite frustrated with Harry because even though they have this game between the two of them, a give and take, if you will, she's turned away from wanting men because she feels like she isn't getting equal return, and Harry is just taking everything and anything from her body that he wants. And near the end of this act, Harry does have my favorite line when Grier gives him a little bit of a tease of what to expect if he came back later for their date.
It's like a vice.
Now, you can use your imagination on what it is, kiddos, but there is a strong undercurrent of sexuality being studied in The Big Dollhouse. I'd say that the usual joke that gets tossed around for when men get thrown in jail for a lengthy amount of time or when they join the Navy and ship off is that they will end up in some sort of homosexual relationship. We hear the jokes all the time. Even when it's not done in a joking manner, we hear about it all the time. The funny thing is that we typically think of women slightly differently when they are placed in prison. The usual stereotype of the woman in prison is either large and kind of asexual in her features and appearance, or they are butchy and lesbians, and if not outright lesbians, they are depicted as angry and hateful people. And the Big Dollhouse handles this quite differently. These are attractive women, and I think we don't typically think of girls in prison being attractive unless it's like a, setting up some sort of a fantasy that this movie is probably helping to propagate. But our normal societal expectations are that criminals are men. They are tough and mean looking. Women criminals are all like Ma Barker and heavy set and about as far from soft femininity as you can get. We tend to think of attractive women as being too precious to be criminals, and guys sure don't want to think of attractive females as being in exclusive lesbian relationships, unless it's for sexual fantasy purposes. But what I'm getting at is that this movie really kind of turns these things on its head. They are living in their own small society where they are forced to create their own rules, protections, and etc. That also means that there are protector roles and someone to stand on top as a queen of the mountain. There's a power structure, and that means that some of these women prisoners have to fulfill something of a man's role for other women who need that kind of presence in their lives. In a way, some of these women's needs are heightened, and that comes to a head when Alcott spots Fred peeping on her taking a shower. She grabs a knife and uses it to actually attempt to rape Fred. So rarely do we actually see a woman trying to rape a man in a movie, and this really shows that in the world of this movie, women are on top. Even women in prison are more forceful, and they wield the power, and in the case of a couple of characters, much more sadistic. There are three primary male characters in this movie: Dr. Phillips at the prison, Harry, and Fred. The last two guys are just making a buck. Dr. Phillips actually wants to help the girls and see that they're taken care of, but really has no authority or ability to do anything. In fact, as we will see in the finale of this movie, he's utterly powerless and is a pawn to one side and a scapegoat to the other. So to kind of wrap up this thread here, what I'm getting at is that there is absolutely a power structure here, and it is entirely run by women. The men in this movie have little to no power at all and are complete tools of the ultimate plans of either the women running the prison or the women planning to escape the prison. And that's all part of the general observation that Jack Hill's movies are considered feminist in nature. And a lot of this, and a lot of his most famous movies, even feature women in leading roles. Even Spider Baby has two strong female characters. But we're racing to the explosive conclusion of The Big Dollhouse. We probably should get to that now.
This is definitely going to bring back some memories for me.
Why is that?
Well, I've been in this exact situation the women are in.
Wait, well, what do you mean?
Well, I was sentenced to do a dime in a maximum security prison in the Philippines when I was a younger and even sexier nurse. They got me on some BS political thing because I was treating revolutionaries who ate some bad street tacos. They thought I was in with them. I tried to explain that the revolutionary leader was good looking, but I was too busy dealing with his dysentery to start a romance with him. They didn't believe me. So, after I spent some time building up my own army of bitches, we broke out and got some guns, grenades, and started shooting our way out. Sometimes, I can still hear the girls' screams as they laid down their lives to help us get all out. I held Mudflap's hands as she died from her gunshot wound. I told her everything was going to be all right. She wasn't going to feel pain anymore. It took days to get all of Queen Kong Bertha's brain matter out of my hair after one of the guards shot her in the face. And there was that one girl. I never did learn her real name. Everyone just called her Tater Tots. She stepped out on a mine and lost both her legs. Mashed potatoes. She was just a torso and arms at that point. I promised I'd come back for her, but how could I? She She couldn't walk anymore, and I was too weak from all the gruel they fed us. And then there was old Snatch Gulch. She was so pretty. They blew her up with a grenade the moment she stepped outside. Old Snatch Gulch, and I'll never forget her beautiful green eyes.
But did that prison have Pantene?
Oh yes. Actually, my hair never looked so nice or felt softer. And then there was that one broad, Rosie Nips. She tried turning us in by going behind our backs and talking to our bitch of a wardress, Captain Stank Trench.
Well, how'd you get past Rosie Nips?
Oh, I noticed Rosie was real cozy with Captain Stank Trench and was allowed to use her office bathtub. Well, I snuck in. I held her head underwater until she stopped struggling, and then I slit her throat with a broken piece of glass, and I felt her die, and I relished in that bathwater turning red with her blood.
Well, that's the end of the big dollhouse. The third act starts off with the real bummer. Herod gets into some real bad shape in desperate need for a fix. Greer even sacrifices the Powerpuff Girls of Cell 3's plan of escaping by going to Lucian.
Ooh, I hate that Lucian.
Now we're getting there. Just hang tight. Anyway, in order to obtain smack for Herod, Greer gives up the fact that the other girls are planning to escape in exchange for something that will help Herod. Now, she didn't give up all the plans, but she doesn't help the other girls.
It especially doesn't help things when Herod, in a fit, stabs Greer in the throat and kills her.
Yeah, so Pam Grier, despite being a force in this movie, doesn't make it to the big climax. But let's shift focus to who is running this prison. There are three main people of authority. Lucian, don't say it. She's the head wardress and top guard. The warden overseeing the whole place is apparently a German lady named Miss Dietrich, who seems prim and proper and possibly even open to hearing the girls' complaints about how they are treated. And I earlier mentioned Dr. Phillips. Now, Lucian likes to get all tortury of the girls when she wants to either make an example of them or just wants to get rid of the bad apples. She excuses the guards for the night, lets her hair down, and goes to town on several of the girls. She also has a hotbox-like thing where if you misbehave, she'll throw you in this room and pump steam in there like a supercharged sauna. She's evil. She's played by American actress Catherine Loder. She didn't do a whole lot in film. She did this movie and Foxy Brown with Pam Grier and Jack Hill, but she died in 1978 at the age of 38. She was diabetic, and it was the complications from that caused her death. The head of our prison, Dietrich, was played by Playboy model Christiane Schmidtmer. She actually had a pretty decent career that spanned the 60s and 70s. And I like that you typically think that our Dr. Phillips would be our great white hope, but no. He attempts to wine and dine Dietrich, but is pretty much out of his depths, as it turns out that Dietrich was running the prison as a way to gain political information to help the powers that be defeat the revolutionaries. And that was kind of a neat little twist. And in the end, some of the girls do get out of the prison by taking Harry and Fred hostage and having them drive the girls out. And of course, Greer was killed by Herod. Herod was killed by a guard when she was stumbling around outside her cell. And Farina is killed when her cat gets away from her and she chases after it. However, the girls actually don't get far enough away anyway.
Nope. The police and the guards catch up and shoot a lot of them up. At least Elcott exploded that truck with Dietrich in it pretty good.
Yeah, of course, Lucian was killed by her own torture devices when Alcott, Farina, and Bodine saved Collier from a pretty terrible death by Cobra. Collier is the only one we know for sure survives, and she's sent to deliver a letter to Bodine's rebel boyfriend to explain she's dying from a gunshot wound that she got during the escape and attempts to hitch a ride with a passing vehicle.
Only for it to be someone looking for her and the other escapees that might have survived.
Yeah, I mean, this movie is ultimately a trash classic. It only cost about $150,000 or so to make. It grossed somewhere around $10 million. It kickstarted the career of Pam Grier, and got the fans of sleazy exploitation hungry for more women in prison films. To this day, it's mostly well-liked. Interestingly, it holds a 100% rating on Rotten Tomatoes, despite the audience score being only 50%.
Well, 50% of everyone got it real wrong.
Yeah, no kidding. Care to give your final analysis?
You got it. On my 5 poop scale, 1 being the lowest and 5 being the best, I weighed several things when I was determining where the Big Doll House would score. While I absolutely did not approve of the gloveless vag exam, was pretty confused by why Pam Grier's character went by Greer instead of Greer, and my high concern over how anyone would sleep nude in prison. I can't deny the escalating quality and fun of the prison fights. We start with the prison cell toilet swirly, then get an awesome mud fight, followed relatively quickly by a food fight, a death by fork foo, to a hanging snake used for torture, only to end up with a shootout and an exploding prison warden. This movie is fun. Then for the punctuation one-liner from the director himself, the movie lands on a full 5 poops out of 5. Back to you, Jeff.
Well, thanks, Nurse. Well, we're off to a pretty good start with a 5 poop feature. But I am a bit concerned about what's going on down there in the poop chute. There's some weird stuff up in there.
What are you gonna do about the poor guy?
Well, I'm going to keep working on it, I guess. I mean, there has to be some reason why the little fella isn't doing so hot.
Is there, like, I don't know, a technician we can call to help?
I mean, it's the B-Movie poop chute. It's kind of a one-of-a-kind thing.
I guess you have a point.
I suppose we just take this 1 week at a time and figure it out from there. And how does that sound?
About as good as a big old bottle of Ortigo Especial.
Well, hot damn, Nurse. Question, though.
Sure thing.
Do you still, like,
Go on, spit it out.
still use Pantene? Your hair is very soft.
Well, thank you. Of course, if you said anything bad about my hair, I would have had to make an appointment with you to mud wrestle for B-Movie Proctology Supremacy.